solving quadratic equations. Up to this point, we've solved quadratic equations by either one of two ways. One way is by factoring. Another way is by completing the square. And today, we're going to talk about solving a quadratic equation by using something called the quadratic formula. Now, the quadratic formula is a formula so that it has all variables in it. And what we need to do is put down the formula and then identify what each variable represents. The quadratic formula is x is equal to the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. Now, we didn't pull this formula out of a hat. We can derive this formula, which we will do in another lesson. But right now, we want to look at the quadratic formula and how do we use the quadratic formula to solve a quadratic equation. Well, the first thing that we need to do is we need to write our quadratic equation in the form of ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. So our equation must be in the form ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. And after we have our equation in this form, we can identify our values of a, b, and c that we will use in the quadratic formula. So once we get our equation in the form of y is equal, of ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0, the next thing we need to do is identify a, b, and c. Please make sure that you take the sign with the variable. So if this was minus 3, b would be a negative 3. Then we're going to substitute these values into the quadratic formula. We're going to solve for x and simplify. Now, when we simplify, we're going to simplify just as we did in completing the square. So we need to make sure that our radicals are simplified, there are no negatives in the denominator, and I reduce all fractions. So this is how we use the quadratic formula, and I'd like to give an example as to how we can apply it. I'm going to erase this here, and we will start with the example. You must memorize the quadratic formula. Okay? We can derive it, but we really need to memorize it. You need to know it, like you know your phone number. X is equal to the opposite of b, plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Make sure that you put your fraction bar across both terms. This denominator belongs to the b and it belongs to the radical as well. So let's try an example. Let's try something like this. Solve 6x is equal to 2x squared plus 1. Now remember we said that the first step that we have to do in order to solve this by using the quadratic formula is to write it in the form of ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. So I'm going to rewrite this as 2x squared minus 6x, because that comes over to the other side, plus 1 equals 0. And now we're going to identify our values of a, b, and c. So a is equal to 2. B is equal to negative 6. Remember to take the sign with it. And C is equal to 1. After I do this here, I'm going to come over here and substitute it in the formula. Remember, whenever we substitute, we're going to substitute our values by using parentheses. So b is equal to the opposite of -6, plus or minus the square root of -6, put it in parentheses, squared, minus 4 times a, which is 2, in parentheses, times c, which is 1, all over 2 times a, which is 2. And now I'm going to solve this. So, x is going to equal 6 plus or minus the square root of 36 minus 8 all over 4. Continuing on, x is going to equal 6 plus or minus the square root of 28 over 4. Make sure that I did that correctly. So this is my answer, but now I need to simplify this. This is my last step. I need to simplify the radical, so x will equal 6 plus or minus 2 times the square root of 7, and that's over 4. To simplify this further, we need to remember that this 4 is a denominator for 6, and it is a denominator for this as well. So I'm going to continue the simplification process. This is going to take more time than anything else. I'm going to have 6 over 4 plus 2 times the square root of 7 over 4 will be one of my roots. The other root will be x is equal to 6 over 4 minus 2 times the square root of 7 over 4. And I'm going to reduce these. 6 over 4 will be 3 over 2, plus the square root of 7 over 2. X will equal 3 over 2 minus the square root of 7 over 2. And that's how we use the quadratic formula. Write it in the form of ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. Identify your values of a, b, and c. Substitute it in the formula. Solve and simplify.